From Their Eyes, a Shadow of the Colossus based fic. Chapter 5, Sacred Stallion. Phaedra rested in the quiet little valley where he remained since the time of the little people. It was similar to where he lived back in the time before the trickster Dorman had fooled many of them into thinking he would be a better ruler. This had been a lie, and most of Phaedra's kin realized it before they committed to the cause. Phaedra shook his head, thinking back on his stupidity. His kind had a special purpose back in the homeland. They had the most sacred job of all, guarding the dead. All Colossi knew the dead were sacred things, and only vile things, like the shadow beings, used the dead. The shadow beings would sneak into grave sites and fuel themselves using the dead spirits. This was why Phaedra's kin guarded grave sites, and he had missed that when he was among the banished. Banished because he worked with controlled shadow beings. That was something he kicked himself for many times. He had never realized that Dorman was using the dead bodies to increase his power and control over the shadow beings. He sighed and looked at the grave sites he was near now. They had been started by the little people who had come to the land. Many of them had thrived, even though they kept paying the tribute Dorman had demanded. Some did it out of fear, not knowing what he would do to them. They had started to complain and refuse when the requested tributes got too big. It had been at that time when Dorman used a lot of power to ruin some of their settlements. Some had been completely flooded, while others had been turned into a vast desert. Those attacks had cost Dorman a lot of power, as well as some of his shadow people. Those events had led to the Dark Day, the day Dorman had asked him to leave the little people's gravesite. He refused, knowing what Dorman was asking for. Dorman wanted to use the dead to create more shadow beings. Phaedra had watched many funerals end at the tombs here, and he would not allow that. His kind of colossi knew what all dead deserved. That all dead deserved respect, and to be allowed that eternal rest. It was shortly after that when the little person known as Lord Iman had joined forces with Malice, and they began the attempts to stop Dorman. The first attempt had failed, but Phaedra had told them that they could try again. The shadow beings numbered in hundreds, and the colossi of all sorts had slowly realized that Dorman was power mad. In the end, Dorman was defeated, and his shadow beings, which counted 15 in total, went into hiding. It was then that the little people had left. Phaedra had remembered that day because before they left, the one known as Lord Iman had asked him a favor. He was one of the few colossi that could speak with the little man. He could still recall that last encounter. Lord Iman had been standing at the entrance to the final resting site. He did not venture too far in, since his people were ready to leave the lands. He recalled the small person speaking. "I thank you again in helping us escape, Dorman. And I have one last thing to ask of you. I want you to guard our dead." Phaedra had agreed, since it was what his kind had always done. He even recalled his response to Lord Amon. "Of course I will. My kind know how sacred the dead are. However, However, Lord Iman, you should remember that because of what we did, your life is much longer now. You have the lifespan of us. No doubt you will see many grow old and join those who have already passed. It is the cost of the ritual. That had been the last time he had seen Lord Iman and the little people. Those thoughts were on his mind when he heard Malice. He had heard the warnings before, but this one really caught his attention. Gaius has been killed by the little man. Dorman is commanding. Be on your guard, Phaedra. He did not need to be told twice. While he had part of Dorman's essence in him, Malice was aware he guarded the dead and would not leave the post. Malice was not aware that he had taken steps to make sure the tombs were sealed inside, thanks to some well-placed stomps. But there was still a chance Dorman could get his shadow beings in. He then looked around, looking for the little man. The way he was positioned on the ground, he could see anything approaching. There was only one entrance to the area, and most of the surviving colossi could not enter it. So he knew that once he saw a figure, it would have to be the little man. He was not surprised when the figure finally appeared, and it was on a horse. Phaedra felt a kinship to the creature the little people called horses. They were obviously noble animals, and were loyal to those they served. They could also tell right from wrong. When the little people were there, he had seen a few horses buck off owners who had wanted to violate the tombs. He watched quietly, and as the horse approached, he noticed it. It wasn't an obvious attempt to turn, or a misstep on the ground. It faltered for a moment, and that told Phaedra that the person was up to something wrong. He got up and approached the man. His actions prompted an action from the little man that he didn't expect. The man fired arrows at him, arrows that exploded. This person was indeed up to no good. He started to advance, and to his horror, the man ran into the tombs. He then had a brainstorm. He would eliminate the man the same way he made the interiors of the tombs inaccessible. He started stomping on the ground, and as he did, he heard the sounds of earth and rock falling in the tombs. He kept it up for a bit and looked for the horse. The horse was a slight bit of a distance away, almost ready to bolt out of the valley. He wondered what kept it from doing so. It should have been obvious that the little man wasn't coming back out of the tombs, unless the horse could feel the man wasn't dead. That made Phaedra pause. The little man could not still be alive. He lowered his head to look into the tomb, and was startled by what had happened. The little man leapt out of the tomb and grabbed his braids. He then felt the little man start to climb. He knew what was going to happen. The sigil was on the top of his head. If the little man reached it, it would be his end, and more of Dorman's essence would be free. It also meant no one would be left to guard the tombs. He violently shook his head, hoping to shake the little man loose from the braids. No matter how hard he shook, he could still feel the man on the braid. Eventually, the sensation ended, and he could no longer feel the little man. He hoped that they had lost their grip and fell. He went to look down at the ground where he figured the little man's body was. He realized quickly that the little man had not fallen, but was on his head. The realization came from the stabbing pain that came from the sword piercing the sigil. It was repeated so quickly, Phaedra had no time to react. The only thing he could do was collapse. The darkness of death was consuming him as Dorman's essence left him. As his sight faded, he could see the shadow beings approaching the tomb. He had failed the little people, and he had failed the other colossi as well. Dorman was happy as more of his essence was freed. He was also thrilled with the fact that the tombs were unguarded. Some of his shadow beings were already making their way inside. He knew that they would work to get at the bodies. It was due to the nature of time in the lands that the bodies in the tombs would still have some spirit linked to them. They would not need any direction on what to do. However, he made sure 4 remained to bring the man back. He then turned his attention to the horse. The horse, which the little man called Agro, was starting to realize something was wrong. It knew what was happening to its master. It might even choose not to leave the body of the girl soon. He could not allow that, but the horse could be useful for his other plans. As the horse made its way back to the temple, he planted an idea in the horse's mind. If the worst thing happened, the horse would make its way to the garden. It was the ethereal bridges between the forbidden lands and the homeland. He then waited, seeing that the 4 shadow beings had brought the man back. If the horse was showing signs that it would not be loyal to the man, this would be the moment. It knew the man was trying to revive the girl, and if it would remain loyal, it would approach the girl, hoping that her revival would restore the man as well. If not, the horse would leave. He watched as the horse entered the temple. It slowly climbed the steps, and he had the shadow beings disappear. He was happy to see that the horse went to the girl's side, as well as the little man. Everything was going as planned. And now he would put the man to a difficult challenge. The man would now have to take on Avian.